He trusted the woman he loved, until his own daughter whispered 4 chilling words: "Don't eat the stew." What followed was a shocking discovery that nearly cost him everything: his health, his company, and even his life. But it was the courage of a young girl, Maya, that turned a poisoned kitchen into a place of truth and healing. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about instinct, redemption, and the power of one small voice that refused to stay silent. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories that might just change the way you see the world. The text message came just as Ethan Benton raised the steaming spoon to his lips. "Don't eat the stew." 4 simple words, no punctuation, sent from his daughter's iPad. A pang shot through his chest, not from fear at first, but confusion. Maya never texted during the day, especially not when he was in a meeting. And certainly not in all caps like that. His hand hovered midair, the spoon's steam curling upward in fragile spirals. The scent, rich, meaty, delicately spiced, should have been comforting. Instead, it suddenly felt invasive, like something pretending to be safe, something that had snuck into his house under the disguise of nourishment. "Daddy, don't." He looked up. Maya stood in the doorway to the sun-drenched dining room, barefoot on the polished herringbone floor, a pink bow askew in her dark curls. Her face was pale, eyes wide with panic. She clutched her well-worn stuffed rabbit, ears frayed from too many sleepless nights. Ethan dropped the spoon with a soft clatter into the bowl. "What's going on, honey?" I tasted it." Maya's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "The stew, I think something's wrong, like really wrong." It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind they used to fill with laughter and baking before everything went sideways. But nothing about today felt like old times. The sun was shining too hard, the silence in the house too thick. Ethan had been trying to reclaim a piece of their routine, starting with lunch. Sabrina, his girlfriend of 8 months, had insisted on making her signature rejuvenation stew for the both of them. He hadn't even questioned it. Sabrina had come into their lives like a summer breeze, cool, collected, seemingly effortless. She was a holistic nutritionist, a wellness coach, a yoga-certified healer who wore silk robes in the morning and smiled like she'd never once doubted the universe. Ethan had met her at a private retreat in Big Sur 3 months after his wife Hannah died. He wasn't looking for anything then. But grief did strange things to judgment. Sabrina was warm, affirming. She didn't flinch at his broken pieces. More importantly, Maya had seemed okay with her. At first. But in the last few weeks, something had shifted. Ethan had started losing time, forgetting conversations. His hands trembled in the mornings. He assumed it was stress. Launching a new AI platform with $90 million in investor expectations on his back wasn't exactly restful. Sabrina had doubled down on her support: smoothies, meditation, herbal tinctures in tiny glass vials, and meals. Always the meals. She'd insisted on handling everything. "Let me take the pressure off you, babe," she'd say, brushing his temple with her fingers. "You don't need to think right now. Just heal." He should have known, but here was Maya. And Maya never made scenes. "You tasted the stew?" he asked, his voice low, trying not to spook her further. She nodded, stepping closer. I don't know. It tasted sweet at first, like the kind grandma made with thyme and carrots and barley. But then it got bitter, like metal, and my tongue felt weird, tingly. I spit it out and rinsed my mouth, but it still feels funny." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. "What do you mean, funny?" Maya touched her lips. "Like when I got that sleepy drink before the dentist. Remember? The one that made me feel like I was floating?" Ethan pushed the bowl away. Sabrina's laugh trilled down the hallway before she appeared in the doorway, radiant in a flowy ivory dress. Her auburn hair shimmered like a shampoo commercial. Her cheeks flushed as if she'd just finished a vinyasa flow. "What's all this?" she asked, voice syrupy. "Are we not eating? I worked all morning on that stew." Maya took a step back. Ethan instinctively moved in front of her. "She says it tastes off," he said. "Medicinal." Sabrina's expression didn't falter. Not at first, but Ethan had spent his career decoding micro-expressions in boardrooms and investor pitches. He saw it, the flicker, the blink that lasted a beat too long, the smile that froze at the edges. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, directing her voice to Maya, "you're so imaginative. Maybe your palate is just too young for complex herbs." I used valerian root and passion flower in this recipe, completely natural, calming for digestion and nerves. Nothing harmful. Maya's hands balled into fists. You're lying. Sabrina gasped, hurt flaring across her face. Ethan, she cried, laughing nervously. What's gotten into her? Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Maya, on the fear in her stance. She was trembling. Did you put something in the food? He asked, voice steely now. What? Of course not. Then you won't mind if I send it to a lab. Sabrina's composure cracked just barely. She opened her mouth to protest, then caught herself, smoothing her hair. You're being paranoid. Is this about what I said yesterday? About Maya maybe needing a different environment? Ethan, I only meant that she might thrive better with structure. You've been so overloaded, and she's fine, Ethan snapped. She's not the one making people feel foggy and drugged. You think I would hurt you? She whispered, a tremor sneaking into her voice. I have only tried to help. He looked down at the stew. His stomach clenched. I don't know what to think anymore. Sabrina's gaze darkened. It was subtle but unmistakable. You're tired, she said, stepping forward. Let me get you some tea. Chamomile and skullcap. It'll help clear your mind. Don't drink it, Maya shouted, running in front of her father. She always gives you tea before bed, and then you start forgetting stuff. Sabrina froze mid-step. Ethan stood slowly. You need to leave. What? I said, get your things. Get out. Sabrina stared at him like she didn't understand the words. But then, just like that, she spun on her heel and stormed down the hall. A moment later, the front door slammed. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was sharp, vibrating with aftershocks. Ethan sank onto the floor beside Maya. She climbed into his lap without hesitation, burying her face into his chest. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner, he murmured. You didn't eat it, she whispered. That's what matters. The bowl of stew sat on the table, untouched, steam no longer rising. It looked normal, delicious even, but now it was radioactive in Ethan's mind, a monument to how close he'd come to trusting the wrong person. Later that night, after Maya had fallen asleep clutching her rabbit, Ethan sat in the kitchen staring at the stew. He called Mateo, their old chef, back from semi-retirement. Told him everything. Mateo showed up in under an hour, collected the sample like it was evidence in a murder case, which Ethan realized it might as well be. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat beside Maya's bed and watched her chest rise and fall, and he repeated those 4 words to himself like a prayer. Don't eat the stew. Those words had saved his life. The voice that spoke them had been small, but it had been the only voice telling the truth, and from now on, he would listen. The next morning began with fog curling through the San Francisco skyline, clinging to the edges of high rises like reluctant ghosts. In the kitchen of the Benton penthouse, Ethan stared into his untouched mug of coffee, the bitter scent oddly comforting after the night he'd had. He'd barely slept. Even with Maya finally resting peacefully, the echo of her words haunted every corner of his thoughts. It tasted like metal, like that medicine from the dentist. He tapped his fingers against the marble countertop and looked toward the fridge. The stew was still there, sealed in its glass container. Mateo would be back today to send it for full analysis, but Ethan had already made up his mind. Something in that meal had not been right, and Maya had known. The truth of that sat heavier than any guilt he'd ever carried. His daughter, 7 years old and barely tall enough to reach the middle shelves, had trusted her senses when he hadn't. And what struck him most, what burrowed into his bones and refused to leave, was how close he'd come to dismissing her completely. He rubbed his hands over his face, then glanced toward the hallway. The light was just beginning to stream in. Daddy? Maya stood there in her fuzzy unicorn pajamas, her hair a mess of curls, Mr. Wiggles the rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Hey, sweetheart. He crouched to her level immediately. Did you sleep okay? She nodded slowly. I had weird dreams, but they weren't as scary as before. He brushed a loose curl from her cheek. I'm so proud of you. You were brave, you trusted yourself, even when it was hard. That's something a lot of adults can't do. Are we safe now? She whispered. Ethan looked past her to the apartment that just yesterday had felt like a sanctuary and now felt like a crime scene waiting to be taped off. I think we are, he said, but we're going to be smarter. From now on, you and I, no more pretending things are okay when they're not. She nodded, then climbed onto one of the tall stools at the kitchen island, her legs swinging gently. Can we make pancakes today? Not stew, just pancakes. Ethan smiled and reached for the flour. You got it? They were halfway through flipping the second batch when Elise arrived. Good morning, boss, she said carefully, pausing when she saw Maya. And hello, chef. Hi, Miss Elise, Maya beamed. Ethan handed her a warm plate. You're just in time. We're going old school today. Pancakes, butter, no supplements. Elise chuckled, then grew serious. I heard from Matteo. He's running the stew sample through his contact at UC Berkeley's lab. We should have something concrete soon. Ethan nodded. Good. Because I'm not letting this go. Elise hesitated, lowering her voice. There's more, Ethan. I've been thinking back. Sabrina always insisted on cooking everything. She'd throw a fit if anyone tried to help. Remember that night you asked for delivery and she said it would mess with your cleanse timeline? Or how she stopped you from drinking from the wrong bottle of water once? He did remember. All of it. At the time, it had seemed quirky. Now it felt like manipulation. She was always watching, Elise added. Always controlling. And you were getting worse. You know that, right? Ethan looked away. Yeah, I didn't want to see it. Maya quietly poured more syrup over her pancakes. She wanted you to forget stuff, she said. She told me once that grown-ups need help remembering what matters, but I think she meant the opposite. Elise's jaw tightened. If she did this deliberately, if she drugged you for control, that's criminal, Ethan, and I'll help you prove it. I want to talk to Matteo in person, Ethan said. Today, and I want to know every detail about what's in that stew. An hour later, Matteo arrived with a steel thermos of his famous Café de Olla and a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. He kissed Maya's forehead with practiced affection and squeezed Ethan's shoulder. Any changes? He asked, setting down his things. I'm clearer than I've felt in weeks, Ethan said, which just confirms the worst. Matteo opened his laptop. So I ran the residue through Marcus's GCMS system. That's gas chromatography mass spectrometry, basically the gold standard for identifying compounds. I remember, Ethan said, from the startup we funded for food testing. Matteo nodded. And guess what turned up? Low-dose clonazepam, a long-acting benzo. Small traces but consistent with microdosing. If you were getting this daily, it would explain your mental fog, the tremors, even the occasional memory lapses. Ethan sank into a chair. Jesus. She wasn't trying to knock you out, Matteo continued grimly. She was trying to make you compliant, just lucid enough to function, but passive. It's the kind of thing you'd slip to someone if you wanted them to sign contracts, follow instructions, never argue. Maya was playing quietly in the corner with her bunny, but Ethan noticed her ears perk up. She wanted me quiet, she said suddenly. She said the house was too loud when I sang. She said your energy needed calm. Matteo turned toward Ethan. This wasn't just about drugs. This was psychological control too. She isolated you, made Maya feel like a problem, took over your food, your schedule, probably even your finances. Ethan's face went cold. My password vault. She asked me for it once. I said no, but I might have mentioned one of the backups during a dinner conversation. God, you're not stupid, Matteo said gently. You were being handled. Ethan's eyes found Maya's, and the only person who saw it for what it was you. She smiled sadly. Mom used to say I have a magic mouth, because I can taste feelings. Matteo blinked. She wasn't wrong. Maya ran over and pulled something from her backpack. I drew this. It was a crayon drawing, simplistic but eerily accurate. A giant spoon hovered over a bowl, and inside the bowl, a small black storm cloud floated among red swirls. Underneath, in meat block letters, food shouldn't lie. Elise let out a soft breath. We need to put that on the fridge. Ethan leaned forward. No, we need to put that on everything. Every damn press release, every investor memo. If this happened to me, someone who knows what manipulation looks like, imagine how many others are at risk. You're thinking of telling the public? Matteo asked. I'm thinking of building something new, Ethan said. A system that tests food integrity in homes, a way to help families detect tampering, allergens, hidden ingredients. Maya's eyes lit up. Like a truth-telling kitchen, Ethan smiled. Exactly. Matteo raised his coffee cup. To the truth, even when it tastes bitter. Maya raised her juice. To pancakes. No poison. They clinked. And for the first time in months, the air in the kitchen felt warm again. Not just from the stove, but from the return of something Ethan hadn't realized he'd lost: clarity, love, and the tiniest voice that had been right all along. Later that afternoon, as sunlight streamed across the penthouse living room in fractured gold through the tall windows, Ethan found himself standing silently at the threshold of Sabrina's old closet. It had been hers in everything but name: neatly organized racks of designer loungewear, herbal oils on mirrored trays, and a drawer filled with handwritten recipe cards in perfect looping cursive. It looked peaceful, serene, as though she'd merely gone out for a yoga class and would return at any moment with a pressed juice and some new cosmic revelation. But Ethan saw it now for what it was: a carefully curated stage set. A trap dressed in linen and lavender. He reached for the drawer and slowly pulled it open. Inside, alongside a collection of rosemary sprigs and saffron sachets, was a small lacquered box he'd never noticed before. It clicked when he opened it, a quiet sound, but to him, it might as well have been an alarm. Nestled within were prescription slips. Not in his name, not in hers either. 5 different identities, all female, all fake. He recognized none. Each prescription was for a benzodiazepine or a heavy sedative. The same drugs Mateo had found traces of in the stew. The hairs on his neck stood. He sank onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Somewhere down the hall, Maya was painting with Elise. The distant hum of a child's voice singing off-key clashed against the creeping dread crawling up his spine. Sabrina hadn't just manipulated his food, she had orchestrated his descent with precision. Layer by layer, meal by meal, soft word by soft word, he hadn't been losing himself. He'd been quietly, chemically erased. A knock came at the bedroom door. It was Elise. "We've got another problem," she said, holding up Sabrina's iPad. It was connected to the house network. Auto backup. I went digging. Ethan stood. "What did you find?" Elise's face was tight. "Photos. Of contracts. Your emails. Drafts of investor reports. It looks like she was forwarding your confidential documents to someone." "Who?" "I don't know yet. The email addresses are encrypted. But she wasn't just drugging you to control you, Ethan. She was mining you for information. I think she was stealing from your company." The words landed like a blow to the gut. He took the iPad with shaking hands and began scrolling. There, time-stamped only a week ago, were high-res images of his laptop screen, open to internal strategy documents. Memos about their new AI nutritional forecasting algorithm. Investor commitments. Even a private letter to the board about a potential acquisition. Every photo perfectly aligned and framed. "I don't know how far this goes," Elise continued, her voice low. "But this wasn't about love. It wasn't even about money. This was sabotage." The room tilted slightly. Ethan sat down again, gripping the iPad like a lifeline. Sabrina hadn't been a desperate woman trying to heal a grieving father. She'd been methodical, professional. This was industrial espionage. And he'd let her into his home, his mind, his family. "Where is she now?" he asked. Elise exhaled. "We tracked her phone to a wellness retreat north of Napa. Private compound, no phones allowed inside, but her car was seen there last night. Mateo made a call. He knows someone on the inside. She's still there." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "We need proof, not just photos, a confession, something undeniable." Elise tilted her head. "You want to set a trap?" "We have to. If we're going to clear this, if we're going to protect Maya, the company, everything, we need to expose her for what she really is. On record." A few hours later, Mateo arrived carrying a worn leather bag and the kind of grim focus he reserved for high-stakes kitchens and family emergencies. They gathered in the kitchen, the unofficial war room of the penthouse, and began to plan. "She'll come back," Mateo said, slicing fresh ginger with surgeon-like precision. "She left too much behind: clothes, her brand, and more importantly, control. People like her don't walk away quietly." Ethan nodded. "We'll invite her to dinner, one last time." Maya, who had been listening from the hallway, stepped into the room with quiet determination. "I want to help." Ethan rose. "Honey, I'm not sure. I know how she cooks," Maya interrupted. "She always used the second spice rack, the one in the back corner. That's where she hid the bitter stuff. I saw her drop something into the stew last time. She didn't think I was watching." Mateo looked at Ethan. "She's right. Let her help." Ethan hesitated. His instinct was to protect Maya, shield her from the ugliness unraveling in their lives. But another instinct, one sharper, forged from the past days of hard-won truth, told him that denying her now would be the same mistake all over again. She had seen more than any child should, yes, but she had also seen more clearly than any adult had. He nodded. Okay, we do this together, but safely. Maya grinned, eyes fierce with purpose. Then I'll hide my tablet in the pantry. I'll record everything. That night, Sabrina returned. She swept into the penthouse as though she'd never left, her white coat pristine, makeup impeccable, her smile trained to disarm. Darling, she said breathlessly as Ethan opened the door. I'm so glad you called. I was worried sick. Ethan managed a smile. I've been thinking a lot. I want to make things right. She blinked, surprised. Really? Dinner? He said. Your famous risotto, just like old times. Sabrina beamed, kissed him softly on the cheek, and moved toward the kitchen like a queen returning to her throne. Maya watched from the shadows of the pantry, her tablet already recording. Mateo stood beside the island, pretending to prep side dishes, but his eyes were sharp, tracking every movement. Sabrina began cooking. The same copper pot, the same herbs. But then came the moment. She reached for a small white vial from the second spice rack. Her back turned, but the mirror above the stove caught the angle. Maya zoomed in from the pantry. Sabrina stirred the powder into the broth with care, humming softly as if orchestrating a lullaby. The trap had sprung. Now came the final act. When they sat at the table, Ethan served the risotto with theatrical flair. Mateo and Elise sat with him, glasses of sparkling water raised. Sabrina toasted to healing. And then, Ethan looked her dead in the eyes. To truth, he replied. He took a single bite, chewed slowly, then stood. You always said food reveals who we really are. So tell me, Sabrina, what exactly is in this? She blinked. What do you mean? Mateo held up a spoonful. Would you eat it yourself? Her smile faltered. Of course, I made it. But only for Ethan, Elise added. Never for us. Sabrina laughed lightly, but it was off-kilter now. It's a targeted nutrition plan, calibrated for Ethan's stress levels. Targeted? Ethan said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Like these prescriptions? He laid out copies of the stolen slips on the table. Her eyes widened. Where did you? Like these emails, Elise added, pulling up the photo files. The mask crumbled. For a moment, she looked like she might still lie, still conjure a story. But then she saw Maya, standing at the pantry doorway holding up the tablet. It's all on video, Maya said. We saw you put the powder in. Sabrina exhaled slowly like a punctured tire. She sat back in her chair, spine stiff. And then, with something close to resignation, she smiled. I told myself I was helping, she said. He was unraveling. You don't know what it's like, watching someone so brilliant destroy themselves under pressure. I just adjusted the dial, gave him space to breathe, and while he slept, I saved him. You drugged me, Ethan said, voice trembling. You erased who I was, and you thought that was love? No, she said softly. That was survival. The elevator doors opened moments later. 2 officers stepped inside the penthouse. Sabrina didn't run. She simply stood, held out her wrists, and whispered, I only ever wanted to be someone. The door closed behind her. Silence fell. Maya walked over to Ethan, slipped her hand into his. You believe me now? He knelt and pulled her into his arms. I believe you first, from now on, always. And in the kitchen behind them, Mateo quietly emptied the rest of the risotto into the trash. Because no matter how beautiful something looked on the surface, if it lied to your tongue, it had no place on their table ever again. The following morning dawned overcast, the city outside the penthouse wrapped in a silver veil of drizzle and early fog. Inside the Benton residence, the air was lighter, freed from the heavy tension that had hung there for months. But beneath that calm floated a sharp current of something else. Determination. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on a pale blue folder resting in front of him. Inside were documents Sabrina had printed out, contracts she'd coaxed him into signing, investment notes she'd rewritten without permission, and several pages of legal jargon he didn't even remember approving. He'd signed them, yes, but in a fogged-over state that now made his stomach turn. Across from him, Elise flipped through the papers, her sharp eyes scanning line by line. She was setting up power of attorney rights, she muttered, frowning. Slowly, nothing blatant. But these 2 documents here? She tapped the pages. Together, they would have given her shared control of your private investment accounts. It wouldn't have taken much more to push for conservatorship if she could get a psychologist to back a mental decline. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the impact of her words like a gut punch. So I wasn't just being paranoid. No, Elise said firmly. You were being hunted. In the corner of the room, Maya played quietly with a handful of Legos. She was building a tower, block by block, carefully balancing each piece. At first glance, it looked like any child's toy structure. But on closer inspection, the design was precise, architectural almost. Like she wasn't just building for fun, but rebuilding what had been broken. Daddy, she said suddenly, not looking up from her project, did Sabrina lie to you about everything? Ethan exhaled, rubbing his eyes. Yeah, honey, she did. Even the night she said I was being disruptive energy? Yes, he said softly. Especially then. Maya nodded, eyes still on her tower. I thought so. Mateo arrived an hour later, his chef's coat pristine despite the rain and his steps purposeful. He brought with him a small cloth bag containing something Maya instantly recognized, the used copper pot. The one Sabrina had insisted on washing herself. Found this tucked behind the pantry sink, he said grimly. Hidden under a dish towel, she tried to scrub it clean but not well enough. Ethan stood and took the pot. Is there enough residue for more testing? Already taken care of. I scraped it, sealed it, and Marcus will run a full mass spec analysis this afternoon. But I did a preliminary swipe. Same compound we saw before, clonazepam. She used it often and recently. Maya stepped over to them, looking up at the pot like it was a villain. She told me that stew would make you feel better, like you were floating in the stars. Ethan swallowed hard. That's exactly how I felt. Numb, lightheaded, like I didn't care about anything. Mateo crossed his arms. That's not floating, that's erasure. They spent the rest of the morning gathering the scattered pieces of Sabrina's scheme. Elise compiled photos from the iPad. Mateo labeled spice jars Sabrina had altered, including a ground coriander container that actually held crushed pills. Ethan opened his laptop, tracing through his recent emails and Slack messages. That was when he saw it. His final pre-IPO presentation altered. Key financials had been adjusted, projected valuations lowered subtly, recommendations swapped. Why would she sabotage this, he muttered. If she was after control, she'd want the IPO to succeed. Mateo's eyes narrowed. Unless she didn't want control of a company. She wanted control of a collapse, Elise added. She crashes the IPO, Ethan takes the fall, and she sells the proprietary tech to a competitor, or walks away with all the files she's already taken. A sickening realization settled over Ethan like a wet coat. Sabrina hadn't just wanted his love, his money, or even his mental clarity. She wanted his downfall, and she'd almost had it. I need to talk to the board, he said, immediately, before anything else leaks. But we can't go in with theories, Elise warned. We need definitive proof. We're going to get it. Mateo said, because Sabrina made one big mistake. What's that? She thought Maya was just a kid. Maya, still listening from the edge of the room, smiled without looking up. She forgot Emma Benton. That afternoon, Ethan made a call he'd been dreading. To Victor Tanaka, his CTO and longtime friend. Victor had been increasingly concerned in recent months, voicing hesitations about Ethan's shifting behavior, the stalling of deliverables, the uncharacteristic decisions. Ethan had dismissed those concerns, blaming stress, burnout, grief, but now he knew the truth, and it was time to face it. Victor answered on the second ring. Ethan, been a while. I need to explain everything, Ethan said, pacing the length of the living room. There's been sabotage. Internal, personal, and it's bigger than I realized. Over the course of 20 minutes, he laid it all out. Sabrina, the poisoning, the prescriptions, the altered documents. At first, Victor was quiet, then incredulous, and finally angry. Jesus, Ethan, are you okay? Getting there. Does the board know? Not yet. I wanted you to hear it from me first, and I want you with me when I tell them. We can't let this derail what we've built. I'm with you, Victor said without hesitation, but you better be ready to show them something hard. These are sharks, and they smell fear. We've got more than fear, Ethan replied. We've got evidence, and a 7-year-old whistleblower with the best palate in the business. Victor laughed, then sobered. She's your daughter. Of course she's brilliant. Later that evening, as the city transitioned into twilight and the fog began to lift, Maya stood beside Mateo at the kitchen counter. They were making tomato soup, Real soup this time. Safe. Honest. No secrets. Mateo had pulled out his grandmother's recipe, and Maya was following it like a sacred scroll. Why garlic first? She asked, watching the oil shimmer in the pot. Because garlic is brave, Mateo said. It walks in first, takes all the heat, and lays down the foundation for the others to follow. Maya considered that. Like Daddy? Or you, Mateo said gently. He walked in first. Maya stirred in the diced tomatoes. Do you think she ever really liked me? Mateo sighed. I think she liked who she could be with you and your father. But people like that, they don't know how to love without owning. Maya nodded solemnly. Well, she doesn't own us now. No, Mateo agreed, and she never will again. When the soup was done, they gathered around the table, Ethan, Maya, Mateo, and Elise. The bowl in front of Ethan steamed gently, fragrant with basil and pepper and memory. This time he didn't hesitate. He took a sip, paused, and smiled. Tastes like home, Maya beamed. Elise raised her glass. To truth, however it finds us. They clinked glasses. The room, bathed in the glow of hanging Edison bulbs and softened by laughter, finally felt like it belonged to them again. No secrets, no shadows, just people who had been hurt and had chosen to heal. Outside, the fog receded fully. The city lights sparkled across the bay. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ethan Benton didn't feel like he was floating in someone else's dream. He felt grounded, awake, real. And beside him, his daughter, the girl who had refused to be silenced, was already reaching for the whiteboard on the fridge. She wrote with bold letters, "Trust the taste." Underneath it, Mateo added, "And always listen to Maya." They didn't need another signature on the wall. They had the only one that mattered. The next morning, Ethan Benton awoke to the scent of warm cinnamon and vanilla drifting from the kitchen, wrapping itself around his senses like a familiar childhood blanket. For a moment, he forgot everything. The betrayal, the sedation, the conspiracy, and simply breathed. He could hear the soft sounds of Maya humming off-key from somewhere down the hall, her small voice floating above the sizzle of a pan. He hadn't felt this awake in weeks. Pushing the covers aside, he slipped into a faded hoodie and padded barefoot toward the kitchen. The sight that met him there made his throat tighten with emotion. Maya stood at the stove, standing on her favorite wooden step stool, carefully flipping slices of French toast. Mateo supervised nearby, leaning against the counter, sipping his coffee with a grin that carried equal parts pride and protectiveness. "Morning, Daddy," Maya beamed. "No poison today, I promise." Ethan chuckled, though the words still twisted his stomach. "That's good to hear." Mateo tilted his cup in greeting. "We've got a big day ahead." Ethan nodded, all traces of humor slipping away. Today was the day they would gather the last of the evidence, undeniable, inarguable. And to do that, they needed to let the predator walk back into her den one last time. As they sat down to breakfast, Elise joined them, tablet in hand, her expression focused and wired. The security team finished installing the microcameras last night. One in the pantry, one in the spice rack, and 2 above the stove. Everything syncs to a cloud drive. No glitches, no blind spots. Mateo passed her a slice of French toast. "And Maya's cam?" She grinned. "Already tested. The pantry lights dim, but her tablet captures audio clear as day." Maya looked up from her plate. "I practiced hiding it under the rice bin. It makes a little humming noise when it's on, so I stuck a sticker over the speaker. Problem solved." Ethan stared at her, amazed again by the unflinching resolve in her small face. "You shouldn't have to be this brave." "But I am," she said simply, then shrugged. "And she's not smarter than all of us together." That afternoon, under the overcast quiet of a slow-moving sky, Sabrina texted, "Can we talk?" Ethan's fingers hovered over the screen. He'd rehearsed this moment all morning, paced the apartment more times than he could count. Finally, he typed, "Come to dinner. Let's end this well." He sent it, heart pounding, then looked up at Elise and Mateo. They were ready. The cameras were ready. The trap was set. Sabrina arrived just after 6. Her appearance was flawless, of course. Pressed silk blouse, pale pink lipstick, soft curls framing her face like she'd walked out of a luxury spa. But Ethan noticed the crack this time. In the way her heels clicked a little too quickly on the floor. In the way her smile wavered when she spotted Maya sitting calmly at the kitchen island, stirring a bowl of breadcrumbs. "Maya," Sabrina greeted smoothly. "So nice to see you, sweetie." "Hi." Maya replied, her voice polite but flat. We're making your favorite. Sabrina blinked. You are? Risotto with roasted mushroom and saffron, Maya said, still stirring. I made the spice mix myself. Matteo grunted in amusement and motioned toward the stove. We left the pot for you, just like old times. Ethan watched her closely as she stepped into her old domain. Her gaze flicked to the familiar copper pot, to the back spice rack, then quickly to the pantry. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then smiled. Well, she said lightly, let's not keep anyone waiting. As Sabrina cooked, the apartment turned into a theater of quiet observation. Maya slipped into the pantry, tablet in hand. Matteo stood at the counter, chopping herbs with precise rhythm. Elise lingered by the sink, drying dishes she had no intention of putting away. Sabrina moved like she always had, gracefully, with confidence, but now every action was seen through new eyes. They watched as she reached into the second row of the spice rack, pulled a small glass jar labeled lemon zest, and opened it. Her body blocked the camera only briefly. Then she leaned over the pot and added something that wasn't lemon zest at all. Maya, in the pantry, whispered, "Got it," into her sleeve. Ethan's heart thudded. He was sweating, hands clammy as he tried to act casual, tried not to lunge forward, and ripped the spoon out of Sabrina's hand. But the plan had to play out. They needed her to speak. They needed her to name what she was doing. When the risotto was ready, Sabrina plated it like a painting, garnished with microgreens, and turned to Ethan with that same luminous smile that once charmed him into silence. "For you," she said. Ethan sat, nodded his thanks, then gestured toward the others. "We have company tonight." Sabrina's smile tightened. "Oh? Matteo and Elise help cook," he said. "We thought it'd be good to share. Oh, I didn't make enough for everyone." "That's okay," Matteo said smoothly, scooping a portion onto his plate. "I'll just take a small taste." "And me," Elise added, grabbing a fork. Sabrina's gaze darted to Ethan, then to Maya, then back to the plates. Her hands trembled slightly. This was calibrated for Ethan's needs, his stress, his, recovery. Ethan lifted his fork. "Then explain the ingredients, just so we all know." She laughed too loudly. "Don't be silly. You know it's my special blend. Adaptogens, amino acids. I used lemon balm and turmeric." "Lemon balm?" Matteo raised an eyebrow. "Because what I smelled while you were cooking wasn't that." Sabrina blinked and the smile finally slipped. "You're making me feel like I'm on trial," she said, her tone hardening. "You are," Maya said quietly from the pantry doorway. The room fell silent. Maya stepped forward, holding her tablet out. The screen showed a live feed of Sabrina, but moments earlier, tipping powder into the pot. Her hands, her face, every detail in crisp clarity. "Why'd you do it again?" Maya asked. "After I told Daddy last time, after I begged you to stop." Sabrina looked cornered now, like a deer finding itself in a room with no doors. "You don't understand," she said, voice cracking. "He was falling apart. I was helping." "Helping by drugging me?" Ethan asked, rising slowly from the table. "By changing my mind one meal at a time? By isolating me from my own daughter?" Sabrina opened her mouth, but no words came. Just silence, thick and damning. "You took photos of my laptop. You stole internal reports." "Who were you working with?" Ethan pressed. "No one," she cried. "I was protecting us. You were spiraling. I did what I had to do. You poisoned me." The words dropped like a stone into the middle of the room. Sabrina finally snapped. "You don't get it," she screamed. "You were nothing without me. Drowning, choking on your own grief. I gave you focus. I gave you structure. You were finally becoming someone I could build a life with." Elise pressed a button on her phone. A soft beep signaled that the entire confession had been recorded. Sabrina heard it. She stared at Elise, then at Maya, and finally at Ethan. "You all think you're so smart," she spat, "but none of you will survive without me." "No," Ethan said. "We're finally going to." The elevator bell chimed. Two plainclothes officers stepped into the room. Matteo opened the door, nodding. Sabrina didn't resist this time. She simply looked at Ethan one last time with eyes full of fury and defeat. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. "No," Ethan said, his voice like steel. "I'm going to recover from this." As the door slid shut behind her, the room let out a collective breath. Elise sank into a chair. Matteo stirred the risotto once, then dumped the entire pot down the sink. "Burn the pan?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Burn the whole spice rack." Maya climbed into her father's lap, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "We did it." He kissed her hair and said, voice thick with emotion, "No, honey, you did it." And as night fell over the city, the apartment no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a home again. Not because it was beautiful, not because it was safe, but because at last it belonged to the people who refused to be fooled by anything dressed up as care, especially when it tasted wrong. The storm broke the next morning, not a literal one, but the kind that lived in inboxes, boardrooms, and conference calls. News of Sabrina Cole's arrest had already reached the outer circles of Ethan Benton's professional world, whispered through legal assistants and executive assistants, rippling outward like a dropped stone in still water. By the time Ethan stepped into his private elevator, dressed in a navy blazer and carrying the evidence folder under one arm, the whispers had turned into headlines. Wellness influencer arrested in poisoning plot against tech CEO. Sabotage or seduction? Inside the scandal that could have cost Benton Labs its future. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from colleagues, investors, acquaintances he hadn't heard from in years. Some were concerned. A few were gleefully nosy. And a couple simply said, knew something was off about her. But Ethan didn't care about vindication. Not yet. There was too much at stake. He stepped into the sleek conference room at the top floor of Benton Labs headquarters with Mateo at his side and Elise trailing close behind, holding the encrypted hard drive that contained everything. The video footage, audio recordings, prescription slips, forged email drafts, and the confession. The board had already assembled. 10 people sat around the glass table, their expressions guarded, skeptical. They had all invested time, money, and faith into Ethan's leadership. For the past 2 months, they'd watched that leadership falter. Today, he would explain why. Victor Tanaka stood as Ethan entered, offering a firm nod of support. It was the only gesture of warmth in a room iced over with tension. Ethan took a breath and began. "I owe you all an apology," he said. "You've watched me unravel over the past 60 days. Missed deadlines, poor decisions, erratic communication. I made excuses. I said it was stress, grief, exhaustion, but the truth is I was being manipulated, chemically and psychologically." He opened the folder and passed it down the table. Sabrina Cole, my former partner, had been drugging me with sedatives, altering my food, and interfering with my cognitive function. She used that control to access confidential files, leak strategic documents, and sabotage our IPO preparation. Gasps and murmurs flickered through the room. Victor tapped the projector. Elise stepped forward and connected the hard drive. "Here's what we found," she said. The room went silent as the screen lit up. The footage played, Sabrina in the kitchen, carefully spooning a powder into Ethan's food. The timestamps matched dates when Ethan had made his most uncharacteristic business decisions. They heard her voice, laughing, justifying her actions, even confessing under pressure. She believed she was saving him, Elise said, but she was trying to take everything he'd built. When the video ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Then one of the board members, Marlene, cleared her throat. "This is unprecedented." "It could have killed him," Victor said grimly. "But the question is," another member said, folding his hands, "is Benton Labs stable? Can we move forward with the IPO, or is the damage already done?" Ethan stood straighter. "I've spent the past week regaining clarity. I've returned full operational control to my team. The compromised documents have been removed. The revised financials, our financials, are stronger than ever, and most importantly," he paused, "we've implemented an internal security protocol to ensure no one ever exploits this company through back channels again. Not even me." There was a beat of silence. Then Marlene nodded slowly. "Let's vote." It took 5 minutes. 8 votes in favor of continuing the IPO as scheduled. 2 abstained. None voted no. When the meeting ended, Ethan stepped out onto the rooftop terrace, the wind cutting through his jacket, but the air never felt cleaner. Mateo joined him, slipping him a fresh espresso from the break room below. "You did it," Mateo said. "No," Ethan replied, taking a sip. "We're just getting started." That evening, as the city bloomed in gold and steel under a setting sun, Ethan returned home to a scene that looked nothing like the crisis he'd just emerged from. Maya was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, building what appeared to be a scale model of their kitchen, using cardboard, pipe cleaners, and masking tape. When she saw him, she jumped up. "How'd it go?" "We're back on track," he said, sweeping her into a hug. The board believed us, and the truth finally got the microphone. Maya pulled back and smiled. I told you food talks. Ethan ruffled her curls. You were right. You're always right. Mateo, who had stayed for dinner, walked in carrying a box of groceries. We're making something special tonight. What is it? Maya asked, eyes lighting up. He winked. Something simple, something honest. You'll see. They cooked together, Maya carefully measuring out ingredients, Ethan chopping onions without flinching, mostly, and Mateo orchestrating like a conductor leading a symphony. Laughter filled the kitchen. The walls, once heavy with tension and silence, now felt alive again. The clink of pots, the bubbling of broth, the smell of real food, undistorted, unmedicated real, created a rhythm of safety. They sat down to eat. The meal was potato leek soup, toasted sourdough, and a salad so fresh it still held the scent of morning rain from the rooftop garden Elise had just started. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy. Just real, just safe. As they finished eating, Maya disappeared into her room and returned with a folded piece of paper. I wrote something, she said shyly. Ethan opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn label, colorful, with bubble letters outlined in sparkly gel pen. The truth tastes like this. Underneath, in smaller letters, no lies, no secrets, no fear. He swallowed hard and looked up at her. This is beautiful, sweetheart. I was thinking, maybe we could put it on the wall, so everyone remembers. Absolutely, Ethan said. We'll hang it above the pantry. As he taped it onto the wall, Mateo raised his glass of sparkling water. To Maya, he said, our truth teller, our compass. To Maya, Elise echoed, lifting hers. Ethan raised his last. To the voice that saved my life and reminded me who I really am. Maya giggled and blushed, but there was a steel in her gaze, a wisdom far beyond her years. That night, when Ethan tucked her in, she asked quietly, Do you think she'll ever come back? He paused. I don't think so, but even if she did, we'd be ready. You'd be ready. Maya hugged her stuffed bunny tighter. I wasn't scared when she yelled, not really. You didn't have to be, Ethan said, because you knew the truth, and now so do we. Outside her window, the city lights blinked softly, like lullabies. The fog had lifted, the storm had passed. Downstairs in the kitchen, the whiteboard remained blank. Just one line, written in Maya's careful hand. Taste everything, trust your gut, ask twice. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from the news cycle. Sabrina faced multiple charges, and her plea deal included the release of internal communications that further confirmed everything Maya and the team had discovered. But none of that mattered as much as what happened in their home. Ethan began sleeping again. Not the heavy, drug-induced slumber that had dulled his soul, but real sleep, the kind that followed days of honesty and peace. His decision-making sharpened, his laughter returned. Maya began painting again. Her latest series was titled Truth in Color. It featured abstract bowls, swirling in vivid hues, each one representing a different taste: joy, fear, memory, courage. One canvas, stark and white, simply said in her scrawled handwriting, If you feel it in your mouth, say it with your heart. And in the heart of their kitchen, between the cabinets and the spice rack, Mateo mounted a plaque made of reclaimed wood. It was simple, etched with a phrase that had come to define their family. No one lies to the palate that listens. They never said grace before meals, in a traditional sense, but each time Ethan picked up his spoon, he paused, just long enough to remember what could have happened, what almost did, and what one brave little girl saved him from. A trap disguised as love. A poison served with a smile, a lie that might have ended everything. But instead, they built something stronger. And it all began with 4 words. Don't eat the stew. 6 weeks passed. The headlines faded, the tabloids turned their gaze elsewhere, and the woman who once ruled the center of Ethan Betten's private world became nothing more than a footnote in court reports and a silent name in sealed affidavits. Sabrina Cole was behind bars, awaiting trial on charges ranging from attempted poisoning to identity fraud, corporate sabotage, and unlawful surveillance. But in the Betten household, the real healing had only just begun. The changes weren't loud. They came in quiet layers, subtle shifts in energy, in the way the light poured into the kitchen and stayed longer, in how Maya's laughter no longer came in bursts but lingered like music across the marble floors. Ethan could feel it, the invisible glue slowly putting them back together, piece by piece. It began with the ritual, Every Sunday afternoon, Maya and Ethan held what they now called Honest Cooking Hour. Mateo, of course, was always there. Apron on, playlist cued, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Elise often joined, claiming she didn't want to cook, but always finding her hands inside the dough or her laughter between the cracks of garlic and lemon. The kitchen became their sanctuary, not a place where danger had once simmered in a copper pot, but where truth now bubbled from the simplest ingredients. Every jar was labeled clearly, every herb sniffed twice. Nothing was added without discussion, without understanding. Food, once manipulated into a weapon, had been reclaimed as a language of safety. On one particular Sunday, the scent of cardamom and orange zest filled the air as Maya carefully shaped dough into imperfect circles for their new experiment, Moroccan flatbread. She was still in her pajamas, cloud print with mismatched socks, and had flour on her nose. "Daddy," she said, frowning as she rolled a piece of dough that refused to flatten evenly, "how do I know if someone is lying to me? But it's not about food." Ethan looked up from the bowl of marinating chicken and set down his tongs. The question struck deeper than the spices on his hands. "Well," he said carefully, "sometimes you can taste a lie in words the way you can in soup. It doesn't settle right, it lingers." Maya squinted. "Like when something's too sweet? But the sweetness isn't real?" "Exactly," he said, smiling. "It's the kind of sweetness that leaves a funny feeling in your chest." She nodded. That's how Sabrina's compliments felt. Mateo, listening from the sink as he washed cilantro, added quietly, "The hardest lies to detect aren't the big ones. They're the small ones dressed as kindness." Ethan moved to Maya's side and gently guided her rolling pin. "But here's the good news, sweetheart. You already know how to feel the truth. You did it before. You'll keep doing it. All you have to do is keep trusting that little voice inside." Maya looked up at him. "Serious? Even if grown-ups don't believe me again?" He knelt to her level, took her flour-dusted hands in his, and said, "Especially then." Later that evening, as the flatbreads puffed in the oven and the golden chicken roasted in harmony beside it, they set the table together. No one rushed. No one gave orders. It was the kind of slowness that had been missing for far too long, the deliberate joy of just being present. Elise lit the candles and dimmed the overhead lights. Mateo opened a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling apple cider and poured it with the reverence of champagne. "To honest meals," he said, lifting his glass. "To brave taste buds," Maya chimed in. "To second chances," Ethan added, eyes on his daughter. They clinked their glasses and ate with unspoken gratitude, savoring each bite, each story that danced between courses. It was the first time Ethan truly tasted food again, not just the flavor, but the intention. Nothing hidden, nothing masked. Every spice had a name, every flavor had a reason. After dinner, Maya disappeared for a moment, then returned with her journal. She was always scribbling in it, drawings, thoughts, flavor maps, feelings. This time, she flipped it open and handed it to Ethan. It was a list. Things that are safe now. 1. Pancakes. 2. Flatbread. 3. Mateo's hugs. 4. Daddy's sleepy face. 5. The pantry. 6. Elise's laugh. 7. The yellow mixing bowl. 8. My voice. 9. The truth. 10. Our kitchen. Ethan read it slowly, twice. Then he closed the journal and pressed a kiss to Maya's forehead. "That might be the most important list in the world." "I made space on the back," she said, "in case we find more things." "You will," Mateo said. "Plenty more." That night, after Maya fell asleep with Mr. Wiggles curled under one arm and the smell of cardamom still clinging to her hair, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen. He didn't feel haunted anymore. The ghost of Sabrina's manipulation had been exorcised, not just through law or confrontation, but by honesty, repetition, trust. Still, some wounds healed slower. He opened his laptop and reread the last email she had sent him, the one that arrived just before her arrest but after her exposure. "I never meant to hurt you. I was helping. You were broken. You needed to be saved." Ethan stared at the words for a long time. Then he highlighted the message, hit delete, and emptied the trash. He turned off the screen and walked over to the whiteboard mounted above the counter. It still bore Maya's phrase, written in pink marker. "Trust the taste." Beneath it, in his own handwriting, he added, "And never forget who helped you remember it." The next morning, Ethan called his team at Benton Labs and proposed a new project. Something beyond IPOs and data-driven nutrition. Something rooted in Maya's gift. I want to build a sensory verification tool, he explained, for home kitchens, something kids can use, a way to test for integrity, not just ask allergens or tampering, a kind of palate-driven AI with built-in sensory flags. The engineers lit up. Marketing scribbled furiously. Someone coined the phrase, gut check. Within days, prototypes were sketched. Within weeks, investors leaned in with interest, not just because of the technology, but because of the story behind it. A father nearly poisoned, a daughter who saved him, a family that turned a weapon into a shield. Maya wasn't aware of the product's growing buzz. She was too busy working on her next big project, an illustrated book titled Taste Tells the Truth. It followed a small, brave girl named Lila and her magical tongue that could detect danger. Lila didn't have superpowers or laser eyes, just a gift no one believed until it was almost too late. On the cover, Lila stood at a kitchen counter, holding a wooden spoon like a sword. The dedication read, "To my dad, who remembered me just in time. To Mateo, who believed me without proof. To Elise, who made the monsters leave. And to me, because I didn't stop speaking." Ethan read it on a Thursday afternoon, standing in the school hallway waiting for Maya's art class to let out. He had tears in his eyes when she emerged, clutching paint-covered hands and grinning with a front tooth missing. "Did you like it?" she asked. He crouched and pulled her into a hug. "I'll carry it with me forever." As they walked to the car, hand in hand, Maya looked up and said, "Do you think other kids have a taste like mine?" "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe they have something else, eyes that see more, ears that hear the wrongness in nice words, feelings that aren't just feelings, but warnings. What if their grown-ups don't listen?" Ethan stopped walking. "Then we have to teach the grown-ups to hear better." "How?" He smiled. "By telling your story, over and over." She nodded. "Like bedtime, but for the whole world." "Exactly that. Because stories, like flavors, had the power to reveal or conceal, to warn or deceive, and when told right, they saved lives." As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, father and daughter drove home, the car filled with silence that felt peaceful rather than broken. The road ahead was still long. There would be other challenges, but this time, they'd meet them together. Maya leaned her head against the window, her voice soft. "Next Sunday," she said, "let's make soup again. Any kind you want. Not the kind with secrets." "Never again," Ethan promised. Because the taste of truth, once remembered, is never forgotten, and neither are the ones who taught you how to find it. 6 months later, the penthouse kitchen no longer smelled like tension or lavender-scented manipulation. It smelled of simmering butternut squash, sage crisping in olive oil, and something sweeter than cinnamon: peace. The kitchen had become not just the heart of their home, but the rhythm of their lives. Its sounds, the sizzle of butter in the pan, the click of knives on cutting boards, the warm clatter of mismatched dishes, were a language of healing that needed no translation. Every Sunday without fail, Honest Cooking Hour unfolded like a sacred ceremony. That Sunday afternoon, Ethan stood at the stove in his white apron, sleeves rolled to his elbows, letting Maya take the lead. She wore a bright yellow smock that read, "Flavor First," her curls tied back in 2 uneven pigtails, and a pencil tucked behind her ear for writing notes on her taste journal. "You added the honey?" she asked, peering over the pot. "Half a tablespoon," Ethan confirmed, glancing over his shoulder. "Too much?" She shook her head, solemn as a judge. "We'll know soon." Ethan chuckled. "You know, most kids would say smells good and call it a day." Maya didn't look up. "Most kids haven't stopped a poisoning with a spoon." He smiled, but the pride in his chest wasn't loud. It was quiet and fierce, like the flame beneath the pot, controlled, deliberate. The trauma hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. They'd taken it apart ingredient by ingredient and rebuilt something better. Mateo entered through the back door, carrying a brown paper bag of fresh herbs from the rooftop garden. "Am I late or fashionably on time?" "Perfect timing," Ethan said, waving him in. "She's about to judge the soup." Maya ladled a spoonful and brought it to her lips. Her face scrunched, then slowly smoothed into something approximating satisfaction. "Balance is close, just a touch more salt." Mateo gave an approving nod. "That's my girl." After the last correction, they served the soup in ceramic bowls painted with their initials. Elise, already seated with a book on her lap, looked up and set it aside. She had moved into the guest room 3 months earlier. Officially, she said it was temporary, helping around the house, being close during Maya's therapy schedule. Unofficially, she'd become part of the family. They ate together at the long reclaimed wood table, the same one that had once held poisoned risotto and broken trust. Now it held stories and second helpings. As they finished their meal, Ethan tapped his glass lightly. "So, the press wants to do a piece, long-form, feature on our family and the launch of Gut Check." Mateo groaned. "Please tell me they're not sending camera crews." "No cameras, just a writer. I told them only if Maya gets to tell her part." Maya blinked. "Me?" Elise leaned in. "You're the reason this exists." Maya looked down at her bowl, thoughtful. "Can I read something first?" She disappeared into her room and returned with a folded sheet of paper. On the front, she had drawn a spoon. On the back, it said, "If food is language, lies taste loud." She read aloud, her voice small but steady. "There was once a girl who didn't know how to speak up with words, so she did it with flavor. When things were wrong, her tongue told the truth. When no one believed her, she still tasted everything. She found poison hidden in soup. She found silence hiding in her daddy's eyes. But she also found people who listened, and that was the beginning of safety." By the time she finished, Ethan's throat had gone tight. Mateo wiped at his eyes. Elise was openly crying. "Should we put that on the fridge too?" Ethan asked, voice raspy. Maya nodded. "We should put it everywhere." Later that night, after dishes had been washed and Elise had gone to water the plants, Maya sat on the floor drawing with markers. Ethan watched her from the couch, legs stretched out, the house quiet around them. "Hey," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you sent that text, 'Don't eat the stew,' how did you know I'd listen?" She shrugged, still coloring. "I didn't. I just hoped the part of you that remembered me would wake up." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm sorry it took that long." "It's okay," she said. "You were trying to be okay for me. That's still love, even if it was sleepy love." He laughed quietly. "I like that, sleepy love." Maya looked up, her expression soft. "But now it's awake, right?" "Very," he said. "Wide awake, especially about ingredients." At school, Maya had become something of a legend, not in a dramatic TV movie kind of way. Just in the quiet way other kids started asking, "Hey, does this yogurt taste funny to you?" Or, "Maya, does my lunch smell weird?" Teachers leaned in more too, noticing her confidence, how she didn't talk often but when she did, it mattered. The counselor had asked once, "How does Maya process what happened?" And Ethan had said, "She doesn't just process, she refines, like a chef." The Gut Check prototype launched quietly at first, a small batch of handheld devices designed to test home meals for contaminants, allergens, and even chemical inconsistencies. But it wasn't just the tech that made people notice. It was the story behind it. A father and daughter, a spoon, a warning that saved a life. They received letters from all over. A boy in Kentucky who used the device to find out his brother's insulin snacks were contaminated. A girl in Singapore who started a school club called Taste the Truth. A parent in Texas who said, "Your daughter taught me how to listen to mine." One day, Maya and Ethan sat down with the marketing team, and someone asked, "What's the brand's motto?" Maya tilted her head and said without blinking, "Believe your gut." It stuck. They printed it on every box. They painted it across the office wall. But back home, in the kitchen that had become the world's safest classroom, it wasn't about branding. It was about repetition, trust, and the discipline of honesty. That evening, Ethan tucked Maya into bed as the wind whispered through the windows and the city breathed beneath them. "Do you ever think about her?" Maya asked, her voice small under the blanket. He didn't ask who. "Yes," he said, "but not like before. Now when I think about her, I think about how far we've come." "Me too," she whispered. "I think she's still lost." Ethan nodded. "And we're not." Maya turned on her side, hugging Mr. Wiggles. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Chef." As he turned out the light, he glanced back one more time. She was safe. She was strong. She was the taste that warned, the voice that saved, the heart that stayed loud even in silence. And in the quiet that followed, Ethan Benton realized something that would stay with him forever. Sometimes the hero doesn't roar. Sometimes she whispers 4 words into the storm and waits to be heard. And if the world listens in time, it survives. It grows. It heals. Just like they had. Sometimes the people who save us don't come with capes or titles. Sometimes they come in small bodies, with quiet voices and a spoon in their hand. This story reminds us that truth can hide in the most ordinary moments, in the taste of a meal, in the look of a child, in a message that says, "Don't eat the stew." We live in a world that often values appearances over instincts, charm over character, and noise over wisdom. But this story teaches us something deeply important. Never ignore the small voice that speaks with clarity, especially when it comes from someone who loves you. Children may be small, but their instincts are often sharper than we give them credit for. Maya wasn't just a little girl, she was a guardian, a truth teller, a reminder that listening isn't just kind. It can be life-saving. It also teaches us that rebuilding trust takes time, but it starts with transparency, honesty, and the courage to face what's been hidden. Whether it's in our homes, relationships, or work, the safest ingredient we can ever bring to the table is trust. So the next time something doesn't sit right, on your tongue, in your heart, or in your soul, pause, taste it again, listen, investigate. Because the truth doesn't shout, it whispers. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, heart-touching stories like this one. Hit that bell so you'll never miss a lesson that could change your life.